All right, we'll call, it is now 6:10. I'm going to call the meeting for the Budget Task Force to order. In accordance with the requirements of the open meeting law, please be advised that this meeting is being recorded and will be able to be found on the Lunenburg Access YouTube channel for after the meeting. To view remotely from a computer, please use the link on the agenda to join the public meeting webinar. From a telephone, dial toll-free number 888-475-4499 and the meeting ID 792-737-0353. If you have not registered with Zoom, you'll be asked for your name, email address. Please note, no participant ID is needed. Just press the pound when asked. Okay, the first item on the agenda is public comment. Is there any public comment? All right, moving right along, move on to new business. First one is a split tax rate. If anybody wants to go ahead and, I know Evan, you had some conversations with Linda, our assessor.
I did. I had a couple conversations with Linda and Brian, trying to get a little bit more information and trying to be sort of as upfront and honest with them as possible to let them know that this discussion is happening, so that they weren't completely caught off guard by it, since it is entirely their responsibility to do this exact work and then present it to the select board for the select board to choose what they want to do. So I reached out and just asked a couple of questions of them. Basically, kind of gearing towards what empirical data do we have that says the CIP has to meet a specific threshold before a split tax rate should be considered. Otherwise, you have a tendency to drive businesses out of town. And I haven't heard a response back to that question yet. I know we have, sorry, kids. I know we have discussed it in the past, and we have sort of this long-standing assumption that if we don't hit this threshold percentage, then there's no point in doing it. So I really am hopeful to get some information back from either Linda, the principal assessor, or Brian, the chair of the Board of Assessors. And ideally, maybe we can have them come to one of our meetings or just kind of discuss it a little bit further. If not here, then either at the select board, or I could do it at the finance committee meeting as well. But in lieu of that, I went and did a thing, and I went on DLS for a very long time. And are we able to share? We can. No. Would you mind?
You should be all set.
Okay. So I put together a presentation with a whole lot of data. And I apologize in advance if you can stay awake to the end. That's fantastic. If not, I completely understand. But what I did is, I believe it was during the presentation from the school and the town on sort of our comps in the area for what we look at. And one caught my attention specifically, and that was Maynard. And specifically, they caught my attention because they actually pay a little bit less per capita, I believe, for students, but they receive quite a bit more in funding, in general funding. I originally thought that that was Chapter 70, but it turns out that it's a combination of Chapter 70 and Community Preservation Act funds and enterprise funds. It's a little bit of a mixture of stuff. It's not strictly due to Chapter 70, so they don't have some magical formula that they get more money. But the big thing about them, and this is why they don't typically fall into our comps, is because they have been a split tax rate community since at least 2003. So they don't typically fall into our purviews. So I went and did a large comparison on a number of factors just to see sort of how similar or dissimilar is Maynard as a municipality, to then use as a benchmark to kind of look at what the CIP is and what the CIP ratio should be, and if a split tax rate is even worth discussing. So I'll go through it kind of quickly. For comparisons though, like I said, I wanted to make sure that we were really kind of breaking down similarities. So our populations are oddly similar. What I found from this graph is basically that I strongly dislike the census because our spreads that they report are half of the actual reported value. So first off, I don't know why that is specifically. I assume it's just built into the error of the assumption. But that's a large range. I believe if I looked at the plus or minus and added it up for Lunenburg, it's like it's either plus or minus 3,700 people is what we're quoting for 2011. So I also don't like this giant graph, so I chunked it down into kind of age groups. And what we see is that we actually have very similar distributions of ages. No surprise there. It's pretty standard across the state. If we look at something a little bit more specific into diversity, specifically race, white and non-Hispanic Latino, obviously the top. If we go a little bit further in, even our breakdowns to some of our less represented or underrepresented races in towns are very similar. There's not really too big of a difference there. That continues with languages spoken. Like I said, this is a really deep dive. Other than English, it's pretty much the same. The difference in the Asian and Pacific Islanders I can attribute to right here, where it's about a 50% difference between the Asian community in Lunenburg and Maynard. So that makes sense to me. But still fairly tracking pretty much the same. Some other similarities, I looked at sort of the disabled population. Those are within the error bars. If we look at housing occupancy, the lower one is occupied, the upper one is vacant. It starts at 4,400, so don't think that we have a ton of vacancies. It's just we have a small percentage, and it's about the same. If we look at the owner-occupied type of unit, they're basically the same as well between that should be backwards. I apologize. That's strange that it did that. The married couple family is actually the large one. It's not different from that one. So I believe it should follow the trend where it's married couple female is the bottom one. Female household or no spouse is the top one. The male one is the household or no spouse is the same. Again, very similar. From here, I looked at income. Our median incomes are very similar on the surface. Lunenburg's 106,000 plus or minus about 12 grand, and Maynard is about 112,000 plus or minus 12 grand, again within the error limits. However, if you break that down into more specifics, looking at family differences, married couples, and non-family households, they earn on average more except for non-family households. So I understand how the median works, but I guess this is why we use the median and we don't use the average. That would be my guess here. So there is a discrepancy in terms of money coming into the town, or in terms of at least income, which makes sense. You're kind of right outside or inside the 495 belt area. You're closer to Boston. Poverty rates, though, are similar. Again, still within the error for Maynard and Lunenburg. And then if you look a little bit more specifically as to the breakdown within the 7.2 or 8.2%, these are the percentages that make up those percent. So they do not sum to 8.2 or 7.2. It is a little bit different. Maynard actually has a little bit larger 65 and older population that's experiencing poverty. But again, similar comparisons. Housing, same basic idea. The median rent, I'll change that one as well, is 1,600 versus 1,500, pretty similar. Ownership ratio or rates are about 80% in Lunenburg and about 78% in Maynard. And housing values are pretty similar. Maynard has a couple more on the high end. Lunenburg has a couple more on the low end. No surprise. I don't think there. The interesting thing is apparently Lunenburg has a dearth of $1,500 to $2,000 units that are being rented. Not quite sure if that's just because that's the chunk of people who didn't fill out the census or didn't answer that question, but that was interesting to me that we have those kind of extremes, the high and the low, whereas Maynard does not have that. but we have nothing in the middle. Most of our apartments seem to be above 2,000. So not quite sure why that is, but food for thought, I guess, for later. So, oh, sorry, I apologize. I was still putting stuff together. So if we kind of, the big differences here, so I didn't put them in, but the main differences between Lunenburg and Maynard is obviously the location. Maynard being closer to Boston. However, I didn't want to include these. The commute time, I think, is different by about 5 minutes, 30 minutes to 35 minutes for Lunenburg versus Maynard, 30 minutes for Maynard. And the other big one that was interesting was that public transportation, Maynard uses, I think, 0.4% of their population uses public transportation, where I think 3% of Lunenburg does. So that was interesting as well, considering they're closer to public transportation and closer to the city. But the real similarities kind of get into the assessments, the assessed valuations of the towns. So it's strange to me because Lunenburg is spread out over about 25 square miles or so, and Maynard is spread out over, I think, 2.94 square miles. It's extremely compact, very packed in. Yet the assessed valuation is very, very similar. So we're at 2.2 billion and Maynard is about 2.1 billion. If you look at it a little closer, the residential breakdowns are actually pretty similar as well in terms of valuation, 2 billion versus about 1.9. And the CIP is also very similar in each one of them respectively. So 4%, 4.5%, 1.3, 1.97, 2.9, 3.1. Pretty similar CIP overall. If we look at revenue though, it starts to change a little bit, and this is where it's going to get a little bit more fun. So the levy, the tax levy and the capacity, the levy capacity between the two towns is pretty similar. It actually tracks pretty consistently from year to year, which makes sense. They're limited by 2.5 other than new growth. And this is strictly looking at the total tax levy is all I'm plotting here rather than the actual levy limit, because we're actually only going to the total levy. Interestingly, though, both of us had quite a bit of capacity left over in 2024. Not entirely sure. I believe that probably tracks with, I would guess, abatements, but I'm not entirely sure. But for the most part, we are levying to our limit just about every year, or at least close to our limit. And we trend pretty similarly to Maynard. Obviously, they're increasing a little bit more. They have a higher budget than we do, just slightly higher.
So Evan,
Yes,
Maynard had pretty significant excess levy capacity for the last 4 years.
they have. I haven't looked into it. I was doing too much other
Yeah,
stuff on
no.
this stuff. Yeah, they have had a decent amount of levy capacity. In terms of the percentages of capacity, though, it's really not that large. We're talking about 0.6% of their actual levy. So yes, it's in there. Yes, we had about 0.8% this past fiscal year, but it's not, 5-6% or something. But we do have additional levy space above us, above what we're actually levying to. What is interesting to me, though, is if we had the capacity, I don't know when we knew we had the levy capacity, because this is about a third of our override that we just passed. And so I'm not quite sure when or where we would have found out that we were going to have an additional space between the actual ceiling and what we levied to. So I think that would be more a question for probably interim town manager or Ezzy or whatnot. I'm not entirely sure. But those are kind of the standouts that I got from this one. Here's the strangest one. So our local receipts. This is just Lunenburg, going back to 2017. And local receipts, we historically are very conservative with the value that we're choosing. And on the beigeish or roseous, whatever you want to call it, color is on the left-hand side. That is the percentage of underestimated local receipts that we had for that fiscal year. So it ranges from we underestimated by about 7.5% all the way up to about almost 35%. The lines or the lines are actually the total dollar figure that was over there. So we were underestimating our receipts by about $1 million in the last 2 fiscal years. Call it $1.5 million on average, or a little more than $1.5 million on average, or excuse me, about $700 or $900,000 each. And if you take the average, the full average, or the average from 2017 to 2021, before we had that large bump, if this is anomalous, we're still underestimating by about $500,000. So I understand sort of best practice is conservative estimates, but the trend is not saying that we are going down on our local receipts. So one of the questions I got out of this is it time to be a little bit less conservative with what we are expecting to receive from our local receipts? If we look at the full 2017 to 2023 average, we underestimated by about $600,000, which is a very substantial amount. If you add that to the 230,000 that's right here that we under levied, all of a sudden we are at our override number without an override. Again, I don't think we should do that. I don't think it's smart to say, oh, last year we had extra $600,000. Let's just tack that on and we can go with that. But I think we can probably dip into this a little bit further and not have to sit back and say, oh, we have an extra $1 million. What are we going to do with that? That just goes into free cash now.
But, so, 24 is not in there, because we did the extra local receipts that came in. We did apply that to the budget, if I remember right.
We did for this year, and 2024 hadn't posted for the local receipts yet. I wish it had.
So I wonder, we get the actual local receipts in time to add to the budget normally? I know we did last year. So I don't know if this
but it's
excess,
late.
do we know this excess goes to free cash, I guess is my question, because last year it did not.
Well, so this isn't necessarily going to be, and Izzy, correct me if I'm wrong, I assume that this is the fiscal year receipts. So you're talking licenses, permits, tickets, excise taxes, all of that stuff, correct? And that's going to be for the fiscal year. So if we're doing the meeting and to start FY25 in April or May, we won't have any of all we have is the receipts that we're anticipating are going to be coming up for FY25. We didn't take FY24's local receipts value, I don't believe. I believe we dipped into what we anticipated FY25's local receipts to be and applied that to the school department.
As far as the budget process, I wasn't here during that time. I came in at the very end, at the tail end. But as far as the local receipts, you can only estimate what's guaranteed. I think that's part of the reasoning. There may be an additional, I don't know, additional business in town. I don't know if it's, for example, cannabis. I don't know when that started, but that's an additional local receipt that, from a local business. That's just an example. But it's hard to estimate without the actual history behind it. I don't have the full history behind me.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good question, Renee. I'll go back and take a look and see if I have designation of whether or not it was FY24's receipts or FY25's anticipated receipts.
Yeah. I just remember getting an email that it was exceeded the estimate. It was kind of a windfall.
Right. But then when we actually come around to the closeout, this is what we're left over with. So
yeah, so FY24 hasn't closed. We don't have the closeout numbers yet, right?
No, we don't.
Yeah.
We don't.
Correct. Right. And I guess I'm not entirely sure if we have to budget only off of what's anticipated, or are we allowed to budget off of sort of historical trends and expectation, I guess.
So if I may, Evan, in terms of setting your tax rate, you have to use the prior fiscal year. And if you move the number up or down more than 10%, you have to be able to explain to DOR why you're using a higher number.
Mhm.
In terms of budgeting for fiscal 26, in my other lives, we work with the prior 5 completed fiscal years. So we'd be working with 19 through 24 since 25 hasn't closed. You can certainly look at 25 trends, but you're only part of the way through the
Mhm.
year when you're preparing the budget. And I can't remember when the major excise tax, usually the biggest variable is excise tax.
Mhm.
Or building permits. You can get a major project that can be as much as several $100,000. I don't know
So
if that helps you at
it,
all.
do- it does, but when you are doing the actual budget process and you're calculating what you are expecting to have for local receipts to contribute to your omnibus budget as a revenue source, are you using only what you are certain is going to be coming in, or
Well,
is that what you're saying you would use that
there's-
5-year trend?
There's no certainty. So what I have found, and again, I don't know exactly what Lunenburg's practice is, but in my other lives, it's pretty simple. We take 5 years of completed fiscal year results. We throw out the low anomaly, we throw out the high anomaly, we average the 3 in the middle, and then we apply what we think the market trend is. Is it 2009 and excise tax is going to start dipping? Or are we coming out and we've got a stronger economy and we think excise taxes are going to tick up? Also, I believe that to a large degree, you use your free cash for capital, do you not?
We do.
So remember that whenever you close the gap and you tighten down on your free cash potential, you're tightening down on your potential capital projects.
But so we're doing it at the same, so we use the unexpended, let's see. When we get the budget for the town meeting, we have a revenue line that's specifically for local receipts. And then we also have the capital plan, which is funded primarily out of free cash. But I guess what you're trying to say is what you're trying to say that if we decrease, so if we take FY23, FY21, and FY2019 as your 3 that are out inside of the 2 extremes, that puts you right around $600,000 of underestimated local receipts that would be received over that 5-year period. If we assume that 23 and 22 are somewhat anomalous and it's back down, what happens to your budget if you are saying, okay, this is what we predicted our local receipts were going to be last year. Let's take that 600,000 and have it so we have some space, and now we have an extra $300,000. Is that when you put that forward?
To me, you move incrementally. You don't want to take a quantum jump because you could be wrong in one direction as well as wrong in the other direction.
Mhm.
So I don't know, when you say you've been 600,000 under each year, I don't know how those estimates were done.
Okay.
Usually, what percentage of your total budget are you realizing in your free cash, Evan?
I want to say, for some reason, what's popping into my head is 10% of, is it 10% of our omnibus or of our levy? It might be 10% of our levy is what we shoot for. But I'm not sure why that's sticking out in my head. I'm not sure, to be honest, to be fully honest. That's a question I could certainly look up, though.
10% of your tax levy would be,
About
if
3.5
that's what your
million.
if that's what your target is, that would be, although you're
That's right.
funding your capital with, that would be an extremely aggressive target in my view.
Yeah, that's 3.5 million. So it's definitely not that.
5 to 6% of the general fund budget is more what my life has been like. And when I say the general fund, I mean the town side of the house. The school side of the house is, other than sped primarily, so much more personnel with a little less variation than the town side of the house, I think, experiences.
Okay.
Other than the inevitable sped student that moves in and you find has to have special services.
Okay, I will get back to you and see what I can dig up. I know we have some information that we've had that's been given to us before. So I'll see if I can track that down. As far as so I guess all I'm showing here is just how far underestimated we were on our local receipts when we actually closed out the year. And going back, 8 years, 9 years, the lowest we've been is about $300,000. Well, I guess that's about $200,000. Yeah, about $250,000 still underestimated. But our averages are much closer to the kind of $500,000 to $600,000 range, $400,000 to $600,000 range.
If I may ask, Evan, is your estimating methodology laid out in the financial management policy? I did not see it. I may have missed it.
Not to my knowledge, I haven't seen anything that lays out how we actually estimate this. I just know that it's been conservative by title. That's all I know. And I don't know, I have not seen anything that, to my knowledge, that says this is why, or this is where we kind of put it, whether it's some percentage up or down from last year or some percentage up or down from the previous years. I don't know. I have never seen a calculation for what we choose other than it's just a conservative estimate.
I'm only going to be here for one budget cycle, but I think the methodology of how you estimate your local revenues is something that perhaps we want to discuss before I jump into doing it.
I agree completely, because I think there's additional revenue that's here that we aren't using, or at least that we aren't appropriating in the spring. I'm sure we certainly appropriated in the fall, or reappropriated in the fall, and likely my suspicion is that it goes to free cash at that point. And that may be what funds the majority of our free cash. I'll have to go back and look at what the warrant articles were for, I don't know if we have anything specifically for local receipts. I don't think we do. It's called out. But yes, I would very much like to have the discussion as to how we're estimating what our local receipts contribution is going to be to the revenue side. Because I think we're sitting on money that could be used that's not.
So I'm looking at the FY25 preliminary budget presentation given by the former town manager. It has here is local receipt estimates of 7%.
7% above, or
7% above.
okay. And that was with, if I'm not mistaken, that was after she decided she added additional funds to the school department coming from local receipts. So she increased the local receipts.
Yeah, by 48,750 was the increase.
Right.
That rings the bell.
Okay. So 7% over.
Yeah, which was total was 3.2 million for FY25.
And that was a 7% increase from the year before.
I don't think it's a 7% increase. I think it's 7% of the total revenue.
Of the total revenue.
Yeah,
Okay,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So
It
we
doesn't,
still,
I don't think
yeah,
it shows the increase percentage, so.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I have. If we keep going, I do have a comparison of how our actual receipts have changed throughout the process. Or throughout the few years, so we can see exactly sort of what percentage are, or what, this is where it gets a little confusing. I'm using weight averaging coming up now, and I'll explain why. But to see kind of the year-to-year change in what our actual revenue from all sources, but including obviously the local receipts. So this is the same data that I put before. However, this time I'm going to bring in a fun little function of weight averaging, and I apologize in advance. All I'm doing here is when we have this chart right here, and this is, I think, something that we run into constantly when we're trying to compare budgets between departments or from municipality to municipality. It gets pretty tricky, and mostly because there is a spread between them. And so you'll see a 2.5% increase on a higher number. It's obviously going to increase. It's going to be a larger number after that. So you're going to start having spreading coming out from here. And it's not necessarily saying that Maynard is increasing their revenue or their levy faster than Lunenburg is. It's just that their levy is higher to begin with. So the increase may actually just be the same increase, but there is a gap between there because of the differences in values. And hang on one second, sorry. No, she went to the game. Yeah. So to fix that, or to kind of weight it, I'm starting to take weight averaging. So all it is it's just taking the levy number or whatever number you're using, for example, the tax levy from 2018, and dividing it by the average of everything from your spread, so across your time frame. So it's how much weight is that chunk, that specific fiscal year, applying to your total average over the distance. And what you get when you do that is it crunches everything down to basically the same basic values. So you can use this and you can compare the school department budget at, 53% of the budget, and you can compare the council on aging at, 1% of the budget, and those can actually line up, and you can see the trends from there, rather than seeing just what a 2.5% increase would do to each individual department. And from here, you can see that, yes, in fact, Maynard is actually growing slightly faster in their levy, and that's what I found is that that's actually due to business. It's not due to residential necessarily. So moving forward, everything I have now is weight averaged, and this is exactly why, because now we can actually see the trends of the total revenue from Lunenburg and Maynard over the course of since 2002, and I started, that's as far back as DLS goes. So everything is as far back as that, and I started kind of chunking it up into 5 years and 3 years just to see if there's sort of trends out of there. But basically, we are growing at effectively a commensurate rate to Maynard. We've actually outpaced them just ever so slightly in a few years in terms of revenue coming in. But on the average, we're basically neck and neck, which I would expect most communities are going to be like that, unless they're having, because they're, at least the communities that are using tax levies as their primary income.
Can I ask a question? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Just got out of another meeting. When you had 2 slides ago, when you had and you probably answered this, why is there a gap? Yeah, this one. Why is there a gap between our levy limit and our total tax levy? Why aren't we collecting up to our levy limit?
Historically, we do. In 2024, we did not, and I'm not sure why.
We need that money. Why aren't we going to get it?
Exactly. And this is kind of, that's one of the things I brought up. I think you might have missed it in this slide here in that we're averaging about $600,000 in underestimated local receipts, which is also money that's coming in, but we're not budgeting it at annual town meeting. And that $600,000 average and that $230,000 is effectively your override right there that would have been paid for out of money that was going to be potentially coming into the town, regardless of whether we passed an override or not.
So anybody on the meeting, who within the town has the obligation to ensure that we are making sure our the receipts are coming in and that we are taxing at our maximum levied amount?
To me, that is, as the staff, that is a policy decision to be set by the select board. Do they want us, and we'll have that conversation. Do they want, what kind of budget do they want in the coming year? If the decision is to tax to the tax levy, that then becomes a last minute adjustment when you're preparing the tax rate, in that you bulk up your contribution to the only variable you have when you set your tax rate is your overlay account. So depending upon how you estimate your overlay account in preparing your budget, that can provide you some relief, because adjusting local receipts doesn't get you to fully utilizing the tax rate. The only way to do that is through budget and the final setting of the tax rate when you set the overlay account.
But if we're not collecting taxes from people based on select board policy, we're essentially spending money to forward the interest of the people whose taxes we are not collecting. So why would the select board ever vote to do that?
I'm not necessarily sure that they've had that discussion, and I want to distinguish between billing at the total tax levy and collecting it. I think we have to be careful about the term that we're using.
I wonder if that large excess levy capacity in 2024 is related to the tax fiasco, the whole mess. I mean, we had estimated bills for 3/4 of FY24, right? We didn't have the tax rate wasn't set until sometime in
November.
2024, right?
Mid-November is when you
Oh,
guys
it was
get-
November.
Yeah, you guys have a meeting usually in mid-November.
Oh,
with the-
that's
with
when
the
we
Board of
usually have
Assessors.
it. But last year, I mean, the only thing the select board votes on is single versus split tax rate.
I thought you guys also voted on, well, in doing so, doesn't that mean that okay, yeah, that doesn't necessarily set the rate. It just means that if the
No,
rate
the
is
Board of
going to be
Assessors
set,
sets the
right,
rate.
and that's
And
going to
we
be
didn't
depending upon knowledge,
have-
right?
We didn't have the rate because only Q4 of FY24 was the actual tax bill. Last year was a complete outlier.
So Carter, does that information change your answer about whose responsibility it is to collect this money?
Well, I want to distinguish though, Tony, between billing for it and collecting it. If the idea is that you want to bill at the maximum levy limit, I think that is something the select board need to be aware of, is going to be the way the budget is designed.
Okay.
Yeah,
Sorry for knocking you off course, Evan, but I'm fundamentally misunderstanding something. If I go to a restaurant and they hand me a bill and it's $40 and I give them $20, there are going to be problems. So whose job is it in town to collect the difference between what we could collect and what we are collecting?
So let me try to back up now. In my other lives, I would have a conversation with the select board about what are your goals for the coming fiscal year, and they're doing that tomorrow night. Then we look at those, we look at the financial impact, and we talk with them about what is your direction. Do you want a level services budget? Do you want a level funded budget? Do you want an expansion budget? In one town, they literally told us, do not tax to the levy limit. We want you $250,000 under the levy limit. So that's a conversation that, in my experience, is normally held at the beginning of each budget cycle between the town manager, sometimes the finance committee, depending upon the town, and the select board for that direction. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, Tony, but
No, you're
that's,
not. So here's the thing. Renee just said that there was some issue with the taxes, which we all remember, and that the assessor's office was ultimately dealing with this issue as it rolled out. So it sounds like the policy can be set by the select board, but as Renee said, they didn't deal with this issue. So then it falls to the assessor. So why is the assessor not collecting all the money we are owed?
Well, is this collected or billed, Evan, these numbers?
This is what was, this is DLS language, and they wrote total tax levy. I'm
That's
assuming
billed.
that's billed,
that's billed.
right?
So then that excess wouldn't be explained by the abatements that were paid out,
No,
Correct.
because there was a lot of abatements.
But that all came from the overlay account anyways, which was separate from this.
True.
That was all, we transferred 1.5 million from free
Yeah.
cash
Yeah.
over to the overlay account.
And
No,
I just
this,
wanted, excuse me, I just wanted to chime in, the tax rate for 24 wasn't actually set until March 14th.
Okay.
Yeah.
you know,
So,
it might be helpful. I can't believe I'm saying this, because I would take the task on it. But it might be helpful if we, at your next meeting, explained how a tax rate's actually set. I don't think people, with all due respect, necessarily understand that. And I think that that would go more towards Tony's question, because at the end of the day, it is the Board of Assessors that sets the tax rate. They have to get direction from the finance team. They work with the budget, town meeting passes, they get direction from the finance team as to what local receipts are. But we can also say, oh, wait a minute, there's 230,000 here we're leaving on the table. We want you to put that in the overlay. And there can be resistance sometimes. So I do think that it might be helpful if we showed folks, if you're interested in how the tax rate is actually set.
I am not interested in how the tax rate is set. I'm interested in why the town has chosen not to tax at the levy limit. Because what we're doing is we're giving money to certain citizens for reasons that I don't think we ever talk about at a town meeting or the select board, if that's the case. You get a bill, you pay the bill. That's what I don't understand, why we are not doing that.
well, this isn't, the thing is though, is that, so they are getting the bill. The problem is that
Yeah.
we didn't add $230,000 onto their bill.
yeah,
So-
so what this is saying, we didn't bill enough.
Yeah, so
Correct.
whose decision is that?
At the end of the day, the assessors can control that decision.
Okay,
It's based upon how much you budget. That becomes a decision of the select board, finance committee, town meeting. But then at the last day, if there's any room, if there's any fudge factor, if you will, for lack of a better term, the assessors can move that overlay for abatements up to absorb what that differential is.
thank you.
And when they move that overlay up, how does that affect the rate?
It moves the rate up.
It does, okay. Which gets it, and that isn't, so they could, in theory, have taken, when they got to the end, said, we're gonna take $230,000 and we're gonna move that into the overlay account. And therefore the rate increases from 1410 to 1411 or something.
14,
a number out there.
18, 14,
that what it would be?
18 roughly, I believe.
Okay,
Now you have to
Um,
be able to explain to DOR if you have been budgeting every year 125,000 and all of a sudden one year you go to 400,000. Somebody's going to say, what's going on here? How did this
Right.
happen?
but at the same time, we've been historically
Yeah.
keeping the overlay budget.
You only have the
overlay
one
account at
year that is
125.
truly an anomaly.
Right.
And that
right.
year was so weird for so many reasons that I gotta think there's a connection there.
Well, we also had, that was the year that we had to redo the 5-year assessment thing,
The reval.
the reval, that was it.
Yep.
I don't know if
Yep.
that has anything to do with it either.
I mean, like 2020 and 2018 are rounding errors, but 2019 is real money. That's like a person's salary. 2021 and 2022, 2023, those are also rounding errors, but there are two on there that are not. And it doesn't make sense to me that we'd be leaving money on the table, especially when we're in a crisis. Like, what are we waiting for?
Could be one of our options for our recommendations by the end.
I'm keeping a punch list of recommendations that we've like discrete recommendations that we've made.
Yeah.
So
or
I
at least
mean,
just
comparing
points
to
make.
Maynard, they're even, I really don't understand.
that's
what's
crazy.
happening there.
Yeah, I don't either.
Sorry, Evan. Sorry about
No.
disrupting.
No, I was intending to have conversations on them because it's all just a whole bunch of pictures. Okay, so moving on, here's where we get into our weighted average revenue over 3 years for every category that we bring into the town, starting with taxes on the bottom here. And then we have service charges, licenses and permits, state revenue, transfers, fines and forfeitures, miscellaneous, and then the average total revenues at the top here. So what this is sort of showing is that, yeah, there are some discrepancies and things do change over time. For example, in the chunk of the 3-year average of FY18 to 20, we had a decent amount of transfers going on. Or fines and forfeitures going on for whatever reason. I don't know why. Other than that, a small amount of transfers has changed, but there really hasn't been a large difference other than our miscellaneous just disappeared after 08. I don't know.
And we saw that before.
Right. It's another one of those, did we reclassify something and it shifted
Yeah.
over and became, it jumped down into this category of I think that's licenses and no, that is the transfers line. Yeah. Did it go from miscellaneous to transfers or to fines and forfeitures? I have no idea. But that doesn't show too much. If we go here where it's not added up to 100%, we can actually see a little bit better of the 3-year average of kind of the big major ones, which are taxes, service charges, licenses and permits, and then the state revenue as well. And what's grown is everything pretty similarly, which is interesting. We've actually grown a decent amount in state funding over the course of the last 20-ish years. And our taxes have also gone up about the same. So there hasn't been sort of we have kind of trended along with, and I don't know what the rest of the state looks like or what other municipalities look like specifically, but at least for Lunenburg, our increases in revenue from these 4 sources have not really differed since 2003 in terms of their ratios to each other.
So, Evan, isn't the increase in taxes kind of predetermined in the absence of an override?
It is
Because of
predetermined.
Prop 2.5?
Yeah, so
that-
you
that-
have you have 3 choices. You have, well, roughly 3. So you've got your 2.5% increase built in, which is
Mhm.
calculable based on your assessments. That is a number that we can find out today.
Mhm.
After that, you've got new business or new growth, which is an
Mhm.
estimate at best, unless there are things that are coming out. That's when projects are finished. You can tax on those ones, and then they will roll into your assessed value for the future years. The last one is debt exclusions. You can tax above and beyond levy limits levies for debt exclusions. Overrides are sort of just built into, as I see them, they're built in to keep, Prop 2.5 is there to keep overcharging of residents to a minimum. And ideally it would follow the trend of inflation at 2.5%. But when inflation goes up to 10%, that's where you have the overlays or overrides to kind of fix those. And if inflation drops, you can do an underride. They're kind of they're meant to kind of follow along with your trends as you kind of go through the years. And Lunenburg has not done that. And I think that kind of gets us in the position that we're in now. Okay, so back to the two towns expenditure wise. Again, this is all weight average, just so that I can compare them side by side. This is from 2002 all the way to 2023. This is the weight averaged of the general government expenditures. We have basically spent the exact same and the same way. Nothing really changing there. It's actually been flat for about 20 years. If you look at police department, I don't know what's going on with the police department. It's the most random noise that I've ever seen. I had to just zoom in and say, this is what we're going to do. We are all over the place in terms of what we are actually spending on the police department from a year-to-year basis. We're down in years, we're up in years. We're better than Maynard, where they are just all over the place completely. But on average, we tend to kind of trend up, which, I mean, I guess you could, over 20 years, sure, you could probably average that out and say, yes, it is trending. I wouldn't certainly take this over a 5-year period. But at least for me, looking at a police department budget, I would want to have numbers way back here if it's such a variable number. It's not anything like this where I could say, yeah, we could just do a 5-year average and say this is where we're likely to go for forecasting. So yes, I'm not exactly sure what's going on with the police department budget. Fire department, we are skyrocketing on the fire department over the last few years. And I know that we have a 5-year hiring plan, or we had a 5-year hiring plan with them. We had all sorts of plans to get paramedics in and an extra ambulance and all that stuff. I mean, the calls have been going up, and I know that there's been reasoning behind it. But compared to where we were to where we are, this is, you can almost kind of see this as like a not necessarily a logarithmic relationship where, you know, you're talking orders of magnitude between these, but a small change like this is actually compounded to a much larger change when you compare it to the actual value. In other words, this number, remember, it's divided by the average of all of these. So to have a small, that change, it's going to be vastly different.
So Evan, is this only staffing or are the capital expenses like equipment included in here too?
This is whatever we decided to expend under the fire department budget lines. However that was done. It could be,
Yeah,
it could be any number of things.
because I know we've had a lot of equipment and I don't know what line that went to.
Well, we have,
Ambulance, the fire truck.
so we have the, oh, what's the
Mhm.
account? We have the account that's the special purpose stabilization account that's specifically designed for large purchases of fire trucks and ambulances and whatnot. And I don't know when we've used that, if we have, I think we only did that in like 2021. I don't think we've used that yet to purchase anything. So I think that's not good. I don't know if it's, you're maybe right that this may be just representative
know,
of we
just-
bought a truck here and now it just set us on a new course. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, that's the only possible reason
Right, because we
I
have
can
not,
think of.
I have not seen large budgets coming out of the fire department.
No. And we just heard the staffing issues, you know, the schedules.
Correct, exactly.
So
Yeah, this is not to say the
our
fire department
department's
needs to
not
take a hit.
growing. Yeah,
Other public safety, nothing really to report there. It's squiggly and average. Education, I thought was interesting, and this to me looks like Prop 2.5% increases on average over time. And it tracks exactly with Maynard. Not vastly different between the two. And this actually kind of surprised me. But I suppose, again, it's because it's averaged out. So you're taking out a lot of the noise here. So you're seeing sort of what the differences are. We lost a little bit here, and then it's sort of just been kind of tapering up very slowly. Public Works, Maynard is somehow spending less.
the
since
roads are
2000.
terrible.
There you go. And we're spending not that much more, but our roads are
I
great.
can tell you.
They don't have that many roads though. It's only 3 miles.
I know.
Maybe they don't
Do
plow
they-
very much
Do
either.
they provide recycling and trash haul, or do they have everyone on their own private collection?
No, they provided, we had a sticker program for the trash, yeah.
Okay.
At least I left there 2 years ago. I think that's still the case.
Well, I mean, if that was the case, then you can take everything from here over. If it has changed in 2022. Human services. Not much to report there. Lunenburg has kind of increased as they would expect, slowly over time. Maynard has decreased again. I'm not sure what Maynard's doing. And again, human services, I don't know exactly what falls into that category. These
Yeah.
are kind of the smaller ones. Culture and recreation, it's similar to the fire department, which I thought was interesting. I'm not sure what we've done for culture and recreation over the past 6 or 7 years that has caused us to kind of start spiking up a little bit. But again, I'm not entirely sure what falls in there. And it, you know, for example, if Marshall Park goes through, does that
Yeah.
become a parks? Will that fall into this budget and all of a sudden it's up here? You know, like Maynard clearly did something in 2006. I don't know. Fixed costs are fixed. They kind of trend like I would expect with 2.5. Intergovernmental assessments, the same. It's noisy, but trends is the way that I would expect it to. And debt service is increasing as I would expect it to. You can kind of see where we have our large purchases right here and here. 2003, 2004, and then 2013, 2014. I believe that's the 2 schools, if I'm not mistaken.
So it's interesting because I can tell you during this time period, Maynard built a brand new giant fire department building, fire station.
Was that in
At high
maybe
school.
2016?
I don't know when they started. It opened right around 2022. So maybe that could have been the high school too. I forget. There was a high school was first, then the fire. I think even a police station renovation was even earlier. Maybe that blip in 2005, 2004. And now they just broke ground on a new primary school.
Which is, I mean, they
So-
clearly, I would assume that they have the space, the capacity for it, because they're actually paying their debt down quite a bit faster than we are as well.
They've had major projects. I
Yep.
mean, major buildings.
Yep. So, I mean, I assume that my guess would be that their new growth is through the roof.
Yeah, I think that retail on Route 27 on Parker Street
The
is
shops.
huge.
Yeah,
Shops and residential apartments.
it's on the same 53-acre lot that Digital was on.
Mhm.
And so it's a large parcel that just opened.
But that
Total
wasn't around, back 2012,
Right,
those earlier times. So
right. Yeah, and I don't know how they funded that either. It could have been,
I don't,
there could have
yeah.
been any number of funding sources for that one. As far as total expenditures go, as I would expect, it all averages out. Really, this is what I would expect to see. Anything after this would be sort of anomalous and worrisome. But again, this is why I use the weighted average function now, because everything gets brought down to this, averaged out, smoothed out, and you can actually compare things side by side. Now you could actually overlay all of these. I don't know if you notice the y-axis is always 0.05. So you can compare all of these and they'll all lay on top of each other. You can compare each department against each other. It's a mess because it points all over the place, but it's at least doable.
And so any small deviation is actually
Quite a bit bigger than you
really
think.
meaningful. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. This little bump here, that's
yeah.
quite a bit bigger than you would think. I mean,
Significant. Yeah.
right. It goes, we know how much our schools cost. Those were tens of millions of dollars or millions and millions of dollars at least. And those were large blips there.
Evan, there's a statistics teacher somewhere that is incredibly proud of you. These are really good. This is the most insightful data I've seen in a long time.
I've been racking my head for months or years now, trying to figure out a way to compare budgetary data across large differences and, tens of millions of dollars in differences. And I have not been able to find it until this. I'm open to, if this is not correct, I'm happy to not use it. But I can't find anything so far that says that this is somehow incorrect.
Well, in this case, it's not millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars difference, even if you just took the raw values. Right?
On the debt service?
No, just in general, like the budget between the towns. I mean, they're so similar.
They are,
I mean,
correct.
yes, the weighted average smooths it out and everything, but I don't know how it could be misleading, especially considering these are so close to begin with.
Right. I'm like I said, I'm gonna keep looking to find a hole in this methodology, but so far it
Yeah.
seems to work at least. I'm gonna apply it to budget season, at least on the side, and see if it works. So if we look at sort of a plus minus on what's happened over the past 7 years, from 2017 to 2023, on a percentage of the total expenditures, this is how we've kind of trended. We've increased in general government, in police and fire, a little bit in public works, a little bit in human services, some fixed cost and some culture and recreation. We have decreased in other public safety, education, or debt services down, which is fantastic, and intergovernmental assessments. On the flip side, Maynard has kind of done the exact opposite of us. This is one of the big differences. They have spent less of their, over the 7 years, their trend has decreased overall for general government, police, and fire. It's basically negligible for the other two. It's increased for education. Their debt service has also gone down, and then they've actually put more money into intergovernmental assessments, which I'm not sure what those tally up to.
Yeah, what does that mean? Does anybody
I do-
know?
That is, I believe, depending upon their reporting, what you would see as chargebacks on your cherry sheet, MBTA, MRPC, those
Could it
kinds of
be
things.
CPA as well, Community Preservation Act?
No,
Okay,
not in my experience, I have to say. I
Okay.
always have to add that cautionary.
yeah. Whatever it is, so if that's extra chargebacks, if that's more money that they're getting on cherry sheets, then that's a lot. I mean, we've gotten down and they've gone up substantially. But those are the kind of takeaways from the expenditure side. What all of this boils down to, so my whole point, my thesis is basically this, that finally, that there are more consistencies between Lunenburg and Maynard than there are differences. And therefore, I think it's reasonable to compare them from a tax rate as well, specifically because their R over O, which is I can't believe I didn't put this in here, R over O, this is residential and open spaces, that's considered one side of the tax, and then CIP is commercial, industry, and personal, that's the other side. Lunenburg has them as the same tax rate, and we have for, I don't know, since 1728 probably. You have the option to split the two out, and then you can do a number of things with them. You can apply more weight to the CIP so they can take more of the burden. And I do want to stress that this is not a way to increase revenue at all. All a split tax rate does is say, instead of everybody contributing, we're going to split it out and say the residents contribute this percentage and the CIP contributes this percentage. And you can kind of vary that to see how much more it's going to pay. So if we look at a CIP value in millions of dollars, so this is the valuation specifically of Lunenburg and Maynard. So over here, this is kind of I don't even know what color I want to call this. We're just going to call it beige, like a purple brown. Has been increasing for Lunenburg, and the residential has increased as well. No surprise there. And the reason I included the slopes in this one is because it's actually meaningful. The left-hand side, this is CIP value in millions of dollars. R over O side, the RO side, that's in billions of dollars. So this is the valuation of the residential and open space. We have no open spaces, so I'm just going to call it residential. Maynard doesn't have open spaces either. So on average, we're increasing our residential valuation since 2003 by about $36 million a year, which tends to trend, I think. If we look at the CIP, it's increased about $3.5 million per year on average as well. Maynard, their CIP has grown slower. So this on its surface looks like their business is not growing as quickly. which it's possible to say that. You can see here, it dips down and then it's skyrocketing up. It's pretty noisy. Their residential is growing by about the same 32 million or so per year. If we look at just a closer trend, like the 5 or 6 year trend, where we're actually into the part of the curve that's somewhat linear, things change substantially. So if we go back a decade to 2014, so I'm actually including some of this noise down here. I'm not just cherry picking the hockey stick here. It tells a little bit of a different story. So again, our CIP value has increased in this instance over that shorter period of time, the last decade, by about $6 million per year. And our residential has increased by about $100 million per year. A little bit more, which tracks with sort of, you know, COVID right here with increasing valuations. Maynard their CIP has increased about $4.8 million per year, and their residential has increased about $86 million per year. So they are still able to pull, they're not from what they're getting for valuation, which is where their tax dollars are able to go for the CIP taxing. They are not seeing a hit from having a split tax rate, at least as far as I can see. As Renee mentioned, they just built this gigantic on 53 acres complex with shops and apartments and all sorts of stuff. And that is going to be more on the side of residential decrease in taxes and commercial increase in taxes. I believe that's where I end. I do have more in terms of, I had the slide going, or I was starting to put together the slide where I showed sort of what the differences are if we used a split tax rate and sort of what the savings could be. But it gets pretty tricky. The gist of it is I did look at Maynard's rate and I did look at our rate, and I took the FY24 values and I took our levy that we levied to, and I kept that levy the same, and I tried to match the percent of the total levy that was borne by RO versus CIP and tried to mirror what Maynard had, and ended up with a tax rate that dropped down. I think we're at like 91% of the residents is the residential tax rate. It dropped down to like 87%, and that drop saves taxpayers about $1.5 million a year, which averages out to about $300 per year, I believe, on the average household. And shifts the burden. It does not generate $1.5 million. It just means that residents get effectively a tax break, which, if there's other stuff coming up in the near future with debt spending, with potential override, with if we just heard from all of our union reps that, you know, we are facing really tough times with morale and salaries and retention and recruitment coming up, we're going to need to pay them more. If we don't have a capacity or a space to pay them more, the options are we shrink everything or we override again. And I don't think the town is going to be very happy to have an override without a tax break at the same time. And technically you could do both. You could do a tax break with a split tax rate, an apparent tax break for a literal tax break for residents, and an override at the same time, which would just diminish the amount of the tax break, but it would actually increase the overall revenue for the town. And that's sort of what my final thesis was for it, is that I'm looking for reasons. I really want to have empirical data that says this is why you can't have a CIP below 10% and have a split tax rate.
Evan, even though the CIP is growing year over year in Maynard, it is growing slower. Do you think that's a consequence of the split tax rate?
Probably. It could be a consequence of the split tax rate. It could be a consequence of the fact that they have 3 miles to work with. They may not have any more space. I mean,
I'll tell you, it's a very different town. They have tons of restaurants.
Yes.
There.
Yes. Yep. Yes, I agree. And that was kind of one of the another one of the questions I asked to Linda and Brian was, what are the sort of the distributions of commercial, industry, and personal property in our town? What do we have for corporate, what's the percentage of that valuation that's corporate versus 100 employees versus under 10 employees? Because that
Yeah.
could be a main driver as well. If we have 50% of them are under 10 employees,
Yeah.
that's a harder sell because you're going to be pushing, unless you have, I mean, you can do all sorts of fun things and say under 10 employees, you get the residential
Yeah.
tax rate or something like that.
Do you know if Maynard does that now with their split tax rate? Do they have any?
Not that I've seen.
It-
I haven't gone
okay.
through everything yet. But they don't, well, I don't know because I don't think it's posted directly on, I don't think it would be reflected on DLS's website because they're just going to post what the split
Yeah.
tax rate is, and what the valuations are. They're not going to say what the industry types are or what the breakdown of them are.
So the neighboring towns around Maynard, I looked, and the only one I found that had a split tax rate was Sudbury.
There are not, so I was hoping to find more towns under 15% CIP
Mhm.
that had a split tax rate, and there were only a handful. We would be in the minority, that is for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
And the other towns, I think, were on the Cape and Islands or way out west. So it's basically Maynard. I think there's one other town in north central Massachusetts, and then it would be potentially us. So it is not it would be more of a precedent setting things than following the herd.
I agree with you because I was always told, oh, we don't hit 20%. It's not even worth considering. But
Why?
where's that coming from? Yeah.
Right. I want empirical data. I had one other point that I wanted to make with this as well. To get into, so I know a lot of the town, or at least the vocal component, the vocal portion of the town, it has been pushing for keep Lunenburg as this rural community, and we don't want to have more industrial complexes and whatnot. So you could almost kind of play the other side of the coin and say, well, do you want to make sure we maintain where we're at and not continue growing and split it out? Because if you're so concerned or convinced that it's going to drive businesses away, but at the same time, you don't want to have businesses in town because you don't want to change the rural characteristics of the town, you can't have and eat your cake too. So, long story short, I think at least the discussion of a split tax rate is at least warranted. And the reason I bring it up now is the select board gets to make this decision
In November.
In November. And depending upon, I am one member, obviously I do not have the ultimate say or any say really more than just as a one member vote for what we put in our report for annual or for special town meeting or just a report in general. But I think the discussion should at least be had initially to say, is there a reason not to split the tax rate? And that's everything I have. Hopefully everybody's still, except other than Renee, people are awake.
Evan, I am really grateful that you took the time to do this. I think the charts, like I have a painting or a graphical representation of the Napoleonic March in my office, and it shows like how Napoleon's army diminished. It's a famous drawing, but like this is really that good. Like these data really help me see what you were talking about and what everybody's been talking about. I don't see why we're letting the traditional thinking about if you're under 20% guide us, because we're now at the point where I think it's either we're in crisis or we're close to crisis, and we got to try new ideas. And even if it gets us a little bit of relief, I think that'll be important because, like you said, I do think that there's going to be other forms of taxation coming. So if we can give a little bit of relief to residents, even if it doesn't make, even if it doesn't change the total revenue, it might be worth it because then we would have some capacity in the future to get costs up. One thing that I will point out, and this is sort of sad and depressing for people on the school side, is that like Maynard really is a strong comp, but they're also it's Maynard and us at the bottom of the barrel in terms of DESI comps across the board. So like while drawing for Maynard is good because it's a similar place, the fact that we're like in lockstep with Maynard in terms of spending means that we have sort of tied ourselves to the bottom of the barrel. And it's tough to, yeah, I mean,
Yeah, because they're
Except-
not regionalized either.
no.
Another reason why I
No.
picked them, except for
Yeah.
here. That's the only
Except
difference.
for here, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, they're absolutely putting a little, I mean, this, you saw the overall difference, right? Like this is pretty similar. They're really,
Those numbers are really tight.
but this is what I was getting at with subtle changes on this graph. You can see a tiny little bit of space there between blue and brown.
Yeah.
Works out to, that big of a difference overall.
And the
That's
new
what-
school, would it be included in here, right?
FY
would it?
23, I don't know.
The high school was around, God, my memory really sucks.
Well, that's probably in the debt service side though, because we're not going to,
Okay,
Dr. Burnham or Dr. Gilson, if we take on an MSBA loan, or Izzy, does that get tied to, that just get tied to debt service? That's not gonna get tied to education. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. So yeah, that wouldn't be so this is
Okay.
strictly in educational expenses, whether that's salaries or whatnot.
busing.
Busing, yeah, who knows? Maybe they had a huge busing issue that they had to put in money for.
I don't know.
But unless there's other questions, this is all I have for now. I will clean it up a little bit more before I send it and put it in the drive.
So
I
the,
have like 57 slides I have a whole bunch that are hidden. I didn't even include.
just to state the obvious, the EDC would not be happy with this.
Why?
A split tax rate is
Oh.
that's my,
What's the EDC?
Economic Development Committee.
Oh, so yes, I had a conversation.
Okay,
I've had a conversation and in it the person that I spoke with, who I will allow to remain anonymous because it was not over email or anything, mentioned that there's going to be some serious pushback from any sort of that there are a few families in this town that own some of the the middle-sized businesses in the town that may not like this because they're going to fall into that capacity. I did, let me really quickly see if I can pull it up. I did calculate out for fun, because why not?
oh, and before I forget, how much does CPA impact this?
I didn't look.
That's the
was-
one, that's another difference between us is Maynard is a CPA community.
Correct. So okay. I'm going to screenshot it and throw it in the chat. So I put together this little table, which I didn't throw in, but I probably should have. That guy goes into, do we have options for the chat? Oh, we do. So this table is, so I was talking about how there's a shift that you can apply, which if we're at 1%, if we're at a shift of 1, that means that we don't have a split ratio, a split tax rate. And so the RO levy is 91.4% at 1410. And this is the average bill of a $481,731 house or $371 house. That's the average house in 2024, I think. and then the CIP levy percentage and what their rate is, and our difference in our overall levy. So I calculated it out. So if we do a shift, if it was a shift of 1.1, that saves the average taxpayer about $62 and shifts it over, and our difference in levy, in other words, the levy doesn't really change all that much. We're well within, I think, Tony's rounding error at this point. I think the one that I had calculated was the 1.5 because I believe that was our maximum levy, and this, or our maximum shift, which I've later found out we can go to 1.75. So a really large shift. This is the one that gets us down into the same territory as Maynard. This is Maynard's effective RO levy percentage versus CIP levy percentage. And it drops homeowners down by about $303 a year on average. I don't have data I don't have an average valuation of the CIP properties, so I couldn't come up with an average tax bill for CIP. I have no idea. I just know that at 2115, they would be responsible for 12.4% of the levy.
Can I ask you a question about that spending chart you had? The one that was like the graphs and go in different colors?
Yeah.
When you did the weighted average, it compressed the data a lot. Was that chart that you had with the differences, was that, how long was the time span? Was it 5 years or was it 7 years?
7 years. That was the
Okay.
7-year trend.
Okay, and do we know how it is that they're affording to spend that? Because if I'm remembering the chart right, the number, the increase they were providing in education was not equal to the difference that they were not paying for the other things. It was like a bigger chunk. Is that right? Where is that money coming from in Maynard's budget?
So that was part of and I guess this makes sense. Let me share it again, just so I have it, so you guys can see it. Where's my Zoom? There it is. So I believe, and Carter, please let me, I think from what you were saying that it would be coming from over here, this intergovernmental assessment, because it's not coming from DESI. It's not coming from the town. It would be coming as sort of cherry sheet stuff.
Well, these are the charges on the,
Oh, you muted yourself, Carter.
Their expenditures on this chart.
those are expenditures.
Oh, you're right. You're right.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
The chargebacks, they're what you pay to pay to the MBTA.
Right.
Can I ask you to put the split tax rate up again, please?
What the actual price breakdown is,
Yeah.
what I calculated. Yeah, let me share this one instead.
So I don't know your assessed valuation averages in Lunenburg, but let me use an example that will starkly display the challenge in using a split rate. If you use 1.1 and assuming, and I would have no reason to doubt Evan's math based on everything else I've seen tonight, a $500,000 house with a 13-cent drop in the tax rate saves $65.
Mhm.
A $500,000 business with an increase of $1.41, their taxes go up $705, $710. And that gets dramatically amplified depending upon how the spread is. So that starts to give you a sense of where the opposition comes from so very quickly.
Of course, yeah, you're talking. This decrease is spread over, was it like 4,600 houses, I believe, or
Right.
4,800 houses versus, and again, that's one of the questions I have for the assessors is I don't know. All I know is that what the value of our CIP is. I don't know the distribution of our CIP at all. I don't know how many businesses are, $1 billion businesses and how many businesses are $500,000 businesses.
The small folks where $1,000 or 1,500 could mean a lot.
Could drive them out, right?
And there is no way to give a tax break to the small businesses
I had read somewhere that you could do something with under
There's a
10.
small business tax exemption, but it goes to the property owner. It does not go to the business, and there is
Got
no
it.
requirement that the property owner pass
it
it
on.
along.
Right.
Now, if they have a lease and their lease is triple net or something along those lines, when the taxes go up, it does mean that the property owner can't pass that. There's no increase there to pass along
Mhm.
to the property owner, but you can't give a direct exemption or break, if you will, to the small business itself.
So you can't have any kind of graduated tax rate based on the size of a business.
No, nope, you pick one of these shifts, and then the tax rate on the residential becomes what it is, and the rate on the CIP becomes what it is. And if you use 500,000, we can get those
Mhm.
tomorrow. What's your typical average house or the median house in town, and what's the typical business? And lay those out on a chart, which we would use in the classification hearing.
So
That
for
would be great.
residential, the tax rate's based on the assessed value of the property, right? The home.
Yes,
How is CIP
The
valued?
valuation
How
as
is it?
well. It's the valuation of the property. It's the
Just the property.
well, and the building on it. It's the assessed
Okay.
value. It has nothing to do with what the company is.
right.
So heating that has,
It wouldn't matter.
Correct.
Okay.
Microsoft could have a shack with a server in it that's doing hundreds of billions of dollars a year, and if their footprint is so small that it's $1,000 is their assessed value, they pay taxes on $1,000.
so it's based on size of the property primarily, because with the home, like, oh, you're on a busy street, or you're on a dead end street, that factors into the value of the property. There's nothing like that on the
Well,
CIP side.
I don't
there
know.
is, it's the same approach. It's the value of the land plus the value of the building. The only difference would be, are you an income? In other words, an apartment building would most likely be appraised on the income approach as opposed to the market value or construction value.
Well, yeah, a lot of
Can I
apartment
ask you a
buildings were a
question?
different class.
Carter, can I ask you a question? What was the increase per household of the cost of the override? Because I know you said $65 in savings versus $500 in increase, but like $65 over a lot of houses is a substantial amount of money.
Well, my understanding is that you have a tax base of around $2.1 billion. Is that correct, Evan?
Yeah, 2.2 is the total
2.2
valuation.
billion. Okay, so you had a $935,000 override, if I remember the numbers.
800 and was it 856?
Oh, it was 938.
938?
that.
Okay.
938, okay.
Yeah.
So the increase for the tax rate was around 44
45
cents,
cents, I want to say.
44 cents.
Yeah.
I'd
44
have to-
cents per household?
No, the
Hmm.
tax rate itself. So if your tax rate without the override would have been $14, the tax rate with the override is $14.44. Using a $500,000 average home, it was $220 impact. If that indeed is your average home in Lunenburg.
Okay. So the $65 would not fund, the $65 savings would not fund another override.
Mm, we'd have to run the numbers,
Not
but
even
no,
close.
no, you're not
Probably
gonna.
not of that size.
Yeah.
There you go. There's the override.
You'd have to look at about a 1.4 factor and bear in mind that means the taxes on your commercial property go up by $5.63, or, you're starting to approach a $3,000 increase even before the impact of the override.
So 481, 417 is the median value for a house in Lunenburg.
Evan, are you
Okay,
sharing it?
Oh, I paused. I apologize. Let me
Oh.
unpause.
So using 500 for round numbers isn't horribly wrong.
There you go. I have a chart.
Yep.
This is from the finance. This is what we put in the, this was from our finance committee report. So this is where bills were in FY '24. This is where they were going regardless with sort of the Prop 2.5 increase and all that. And then this is where they went with the override and the new estimated tax bill. So the average house increased by $317. And that
That's
paid
not
for your $900,000
Yeah.
override.
What's
But if
not
we
shown on the
coupled
table is the
the-
revaluation.
If we coupled the split tax rate with collecting at the levy limit and figuring out how to claw back our local receipts, then we're talking real money. I mean, that's $1 million together, because the first two on your chart, Evan, were $830,000 together. If we had $65 per household to play with, that would get us a significant chunk of change. And we wouldn't have to increase anybody's taxes to do it, other than the businesses.
Which is likely to be a hard sell.
Yeah, I can't imagine many businesses wanting to do this. And
Especially
understandably,
small business. I mean, if we
Right.
can't give a break to small businesses, that makes it really hard.
I wasn't aware of that. So I
Yeah,
want to look more into that to see if there's Carter, is there nothing that can be like, is it sort of anti-statutorily set up that we can't? Or is it something that would have to go through the legislature and be approved?
There's nothing in the current statutes that would allow you to do it, other than the small business exemption, which goes to the property owner.
Which doesn't help the majority of them.
Yeah. The other thing I don't want you to lose sight of, that right now you've planned your capital budgets with the majority of it coming out of free cash.
Mhm.
So as you claw back, as suggested, local receipts, that means less free cash, that means less capital. I'm not suggesting you don't do it. I just want to make sure everyone remembers that interlink between the operating side of the budget and the capital side.
yeah, the rock in the hard place.
But I still don't understand how that would happen. Because if we still have the overage of the underestimation of the local receipts, that chunk, that whole amount doesn't go into, or are you saying that whole amount goes into free cash at the closeout of the year?
Depending upon how it balances out against the rest of your budget, yes.
Right. You take snow and ice out of there and probably, and then,
You take snow and, yeah, you do some other things. So let's just say that your local receipts were gonna be 2 million and you estimated them at 1.5. And every other revenue item and every other expense hit spot on. You'd have free cash of $500,000. Now let's say that you decide there's room to move the local receipts up, and you move it to 1.7. And every other revenue item and every other expense hit everything spot on. Now your free cash is 300,000. Yes, you had $200,000 more in your operating budget, but you now have 300,000 left on your surplus cash for snow and ice, anything else you need to backfill in your capital. And again, I'm not suggesting you don't do these things. I just want to make sure people understand how they're linked.
no, I appreciate that. I didn't realize that that's how they were linked. That's a very useful piece of information. So it's basically the overage of the local receipts after everything is squared away becomes a large chunk potentially of your next fiscal year's capital budget.
Yes.
And by diminishing that and overestimating or estimating higher than before, you're limiting the amount of potential capital you have or free cash you have for next year's capital projects. But you also have an operating budget that's potentially a couple $100,000 higher, which is a number of jobs potentially, or salary increases or whatnot. And it kind of becomes that weighing of what's more important, the people or the infrastructure or the whatnot, or the capital projects, which
It is nice to have people to drive the snow plow trucks. It's also nice to have snow plow trucks.
you could always have two people in the truck instead of one. Since the truck is broken, they only have one truck.
So Carter, there's no other source for capital?
I mean, I'll double check, but not that I can recall. The classification hearing will bring you 3 basic tax credits. One's a residential credit, one's the small business credit. And then there's the classification hearing. There's 3 basic decisions that night. I'll double check on it, Renee. I always have to do this as I recall, because I have been out of the state for 18 months and, you know, the legislature might have passed something and it just hasn't hit my brain wave yet.
Mhm.
I do have one question, for the superintendent. Are we hold harmless for the funding, formula at this point?
We were told no.
Okay. That's good.
But we are in the other category, right? The one that's just barely better than hold harmless. The minimum growth or whatever, the minimum impact or whatever it was category.
I don't recall the correct terminology on that at the moment, but I do believe that you're right.
Okay. If I can find that in my email.
Thank you.
So that's all I have. Hopefully that's not too much.
So do you think Brian and I'm blanking, is it Lori? Or principal
Linda.
assessor? Linda. I know it's an L. Do you think they'd be willing to talk with us about like look into this potential impact, things like that?
They seem to be. When they were having email conversations with me, they seemed to be interested in it, but
Yeah.
my last email went out, I think on Friday. I haven't heard back from them yet, but I mean, it's Monday and I would take the weekend
Yeah.
off if I were them. So I don't know.
Because like you said, we don't know the distribution of the size of businesses and things like that. Like,
Right, exactly.
uh,
Yeah, my outstanding questions so far to them. Oh, I emailed them on Thursday.
yeah, I saw your,
Oh yeah, you're on there.
yeah.
Yeah, I said my main question was, what evidence is there of driving CIP out of a municipality with a split tax rate and a sub 20% CIP? I've heard from a number of people that splitting the rate will drive businesses out of town if there isn't enough diversity to distribute the levy burden, but I've yet to see empirical data to support. To go a step further, I'd be curious to see the effect on the various types of CIP in town, large corporate-owned businesses versus mom and pop style businesses. How does the ratio of those affect the retention of businesses with a split rate? So hopefully they get
Because
back to me, but go ahead.
Yeah, Brian commented that Maynard's split tax rate was likely due to when digital was booming there, and they just never went back to a single rate.
Which, yeah. But
So they've managed to survive and grow.
but digital's, but even if it was like Tony said, it's based on the valuation. It could be a shack and it could be a multi-billion-dollar business. It's
That's
that
not fair.
53-acre property. Yeah, exactly. It's not.
My sister and brother-in-law both work for Microsoft. And one of the things that I've learned is all of their server farms are out in the middle of nowhere for this very reason.
Yeah,
Because they pay almost no taxes.
yeah,
And they have enormous computing power. And it's literally like in Eastern Oregon, where there's no people no nothing. They just need a water source so they can get some electricity, and that's it. So it is yet another way in which people, especially middle class people in America, get hosed by the tax system.
Mhm. The other thing that has come up with tax rate is the California, is it Prop 13? Not sure I'm getting the number right,
I think you're right.
but that's something that would have to go to the state and for something for our legislators to look into.
Is this the tax rate based on the price you pay?
Yeah,
Conveyance.
you buy and you're capped at a 1%, and then when you sell, it's reevaluated, reassessed. And I think there were loopholes, like, oh, you would sell to your, you would sell to your grandchild or whatever. So homes would stay in family and not ever be really reassessed. I think they have at least tried, if not been successful in closing those loopholes, but it can't be perfect because I don't know of any other state that does it besides California.
Michigan has a similar system.
Oh, yeah.
When you
Oh,
buy
okay,
your
2 out
house,
of
when you
50.
buy your house, your value can only go up by a inflation factor that the state sets annually, plus any additions and such that you put on it. So
Okay.
you could buy a house for $30,000 which you can actually do in Michigan. And 10 years later, it might be at 60, whereas the house next door to you has sold 2 or 3 times, and it's now at $175,000 because it's reappraised at the time of the sale.
Mhm.
I do have a question. Izzy, can we download the property values out of Munis into an Excel spreadsheet?
We should be able to.
If that's the case, we could then sort all the properties low to high and have differential tax rates to give you an example of what happens to various kinds of properties.
I think those files exist on the assessor's website, or they used to, those spreadsheets.
Well, we just want the CIP properties, don't we?
I think they have class on there,
Yeah,
so you could filter out.
I have a question. One of the things that I was thinking of in terms of taxes is, what if we made a property tax based on the assessed value of the house? If it's over a certain amount, you just pay that amount. If it's under that amount, then you look at somebody's income. And if their income's under a certain amount, they pay no tax. And then if your income is above a certain amount and your property value is below the cap, then you pay a different rate. Is that kind of taxation system legal?
no, you'd have to get special legislation to do it.
Mm-mm.
Right. Do we have anything else on the agenda?
The CPA or the CBA stuff, like the bargaining stuff.
CBA or PA?
The agenda says CPA.
Yeah.
Oh. I did not get a chance to put anything together for CPA communities. I was busy on split tax rates.
Yeah, we talked about it at a previous meeting, and it sounded like the program wasn't as attractive as it was at the start, if I remember right. I think in the beginning, you got a lot more return on your investment than now. Is that?
Yes, so a CPA is a surcharge on the property from 1% to 3%. And you can exempt certain amount of property, let's say under $100,000. In the beginning, there were so few communities in it that they were getting almost 100% return on whatever the community raised. That dipped over time as communities became more interested in it. The legislature did make some changes to the fees that support the program. But you're probably on the order of, I mean, I'd have to look again, but I believe you're probably gonna be on the order of 65% plus or minus. It's all, a lot of it's driven by the real estate market and the transactions at the registry of deeds.
And then,
It's still not a bad return on your money.
but are you limited on what you could spend that money on?
Yes. You can spend it essentially on three basic buckets, if you will. One being conservation, parks, recreation, think land. The second being historic preservation. So work on the Ritter Building that you
Yeah.
might have had to undertake with capital money, you could now use CPA. And the third is affordable housing. You have to spend a certain amount on each of those buckets. And
Oh.
you can spend some on administration. You have time, it's not, you don't spend the exact amount every single year. One of the communities that I worked in is this year, for the first time, spending affordable housing money. But they're spending something like 1.7 million, which is the equivalent of about 5 years of collections, because their accounts built up that much over time. But there are restrictions on what you can spend it on.
Okay, so we couldn't just spend it all on Marshall Park, for example.
No, you could spend a substantial amount on Marshall Park, but you'd have to set aside some money into
Yeah,
the
other
other two
two.
buckets. And over time, you've got to equalize how you're spending the money.
And are you committed for a certain period of time?
I need to double check, but my memory is that once you adopt it, you're committed for 3 years. And of course, if you're pledging it to support a bond issue, then you're locked in for the life of the bond issue. And it is a surcharge. So if your property taxes are using the $500,000 house and a $14 tax rate, you are what, $7,000 $7,000. The surcharge would be on the order for $120, because you get an exemption off the top.
Yeah, I'm not crazy about being restricted on what you can spend it on.
We can bring some folks in to explain it in some detail if you'd like.
It seems like it's too restrictive to justify the small amount of return that we would see, if any.
All depends on your viewpoint. If I could get a 60% return on my money, I'd probably put it in that bank.
Oh, yeah. But if you could get a 60% return on your money, but you could only spend that 60% on new tires, you probably would be less.
Or you
Yeah,
can only
yeah.
spend it on Brussels sprouts, would you? Or...
Right.
As long as they come with bacon and almond, you know.
Well, I don't think there's much. I mean, does anybody want to have them added to the agenda? I just.
I
What do
think
you
there's
think,
too many
Carter?
other things.
I mean, the fundamental problem here is we just don't have a lot of levers to turn on the tax front. You know, like
The
when I
revenue
told my
side.
dad we were talking about this, he said, "You guys got to realize that the state and the feds don't want any competition. So whatever you do, you got to be careful." And I think that's overwhelmingly the message that Carter has delivered to us. We just don't have a lot of knobs and dials to turn.
Yeah, we need to pick up a paper route to generate more money. Increase our allowance.
Could do mine. I don't get the newspaper until 12:30 on Sunday afternoons. Completely
I
defeats
used
the
to do.
purpose.
I did it.
Oh, I
was
did
a
it too.
postdoc.
I had paper route. I had a paper route in rural Ohio. My paper route was like almost 10 miles long. I had like never more than 40 people. It was ridiculous.
And I had a paper route too.
I think those of us who had paper routes may be dating ourselves a tad.
Yeah.
All right. So where do we go from here now?
What's our next thing to talk about? I do have to say this was not as sad as last week's topic.
Last week was tough.
Last week's
Yes.
topic was like going to an animal shelter. It was so sad. Like I thought the Sarah McLaughlin music was gonna play in the background. We're doomed.
We are on the precipice potentially, that's for sure.
Yeah, everyone keeps asking me, so are we headed for an override? Are we headed for an override?
Someday.
That's the number one question I get no this year.
Capital planning was supposed to be the next thing. Have they met?
No, they haven't, and I don't know if they have a meeting scheduled. I think
we do
yeah.
for September 30th.
Oh, great. That's the day we're supposed to do the budget task force thing for them.
Wait, capital planning has a meeting the 30th?
I think that Evan, the librarian, or Muir, sorry,
Muir.
was trying to bring everybody together on the capital planning committee for the 30th. Did I see that or no?
So it's not the capital planning committee, it's all the department heads to go over
Got it.
their capital
Got it,
plan
for the
slides.
budget. Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
So
Yeah, I
who's
think
the
that-
head of capital planning?
Peter
Peter.
Beardmore.
All right. Well, I know we can get Peter Beardmore to talk.
Can he talk longer than I just talked though? That was,
Evan,
I know he can. I know.
I've been on the committee for 2 years. He can talk way longer.
There was a noted decrease in the finance committee meetings when he made the shift.
All right. Well, then I think September 30th, we should invite Peter and tell us what the town's going to spend money on.
I don't know if he'll know. I think they're behind.
They are.
I mean, at least we'll get some idea because, like, if they don't have any meetings scheduled, like, how long are we going to wait? I mean, we're like when's town meeting? When's special town meeting in November?
Well,
So we're like a month and a half away.
But are we allowed to even give an update? We didn't submit anything for the
I
warrant.
mean,
Do we
select
have
board
to
can put-
submit to give an update?
Select board can add a warrant anytime they want.
Can we?
Yeah.
I mean, it would just be an update. It's not anything to vote on.
Just be like,
Right.
like a 2-minute presentation.
Yeah, it's your warrant. You guys can technically do whatever you want. I don't think there's a requirement in the charter. You guys only have the requirement that the 60 days open is in the charter just so that you guys have time to kind of go through them and give everyone else a deadline. But select board has put articles forward after that deadline before.
So should we submit something about giving an update?
Yeah, I think that it makes sense to do that. I think that the one thing that it will do is it'll give us temperature for the ideas, right? Like it's a lot of work to do all this and then refer things to the committee. And then the committee has to make a decision like, well, what do we think the voters are going to want to do? If we talk about it at a town meeting, my guess is there'll be questions and then we'll have an
To the
idea.
20 voters who attend the November town meeting?
Well, you,
My dad will have questions, Renee.
you actually may have a bit more attendance in that because you have not only the
Marshall.
Marshall Park that came in from the Parks Commission, but they did deliver a citizens petition with the 100 required signatures. it's at the tail end of the warrant, but I suspect they will be doing their very best to turn out a number of people.
What's the citizens petition for?
Bonding Marshall Park.
Oh, it is for Marshall Park.
Yeah, I think I think it's 5.2 million is their request. The one from the Parks Commission did not have a number in it yet.
So DLS.
You
'cause I
okay,
haven't spent the-
Tony?
Since I haven't spent enough
But,
time on
like,
DLS, they have
there
a
are people-
calculator.
Oh my God.
Wait, we may have to resuscitate Tony.
That's so much money.
That was supposed to be the total cost of the whole project. 5.2 million.
Oh my God.
Is that
I
in
mean,
addition, is that in addition
we-
to the million from the ARPA?
Yes,
Yes, the
Yes.
1.5
And then
million,
the 500,000 grant, they.
right?
yes.
Are they building a roller coaster?
Two, actually.
Okay, there we go.
So
If
I've been
if the
trying
committee
to
does
ask this.
wish to make a report, I need to know that sooner rather than later so I can put it into the
Get it printed.
warrant.
I think we should.
I think we should.
Yeah, I think we should too. Do we need a motion
I will make
for
a
Tony
motion.
to write an article?
Well, I think it's pretty
I'll write it, that's
straightforward.
Yeah.
I can write it.
Well,
Okay,
he's our resident attorney, so.
not this kind of attorney. I only deal with people that are accused of bad behavior. So, is there anything else we need to do tonight?
I don't think so. We're good. Oh, go ahead.
I just have a question for Izzy. So if we borrow $5.2 million, typically what do we get for an interest rate on that?
I'd have to reach out to the bonding agent to see what the rates are.
Okay.
Currently. I couldn't just tell you.
Because DLS has a calculator and they say they
Yep.
give an example of 0.475.
Mhm.
I have
You-
no idea if that's reasonable.
I would have guessed 4.25.
Okay,
And what it costs you depends upon how you structure it. There's different ways to structure it, including while you're under construction and you're anticipating interest rates to come down. You would most likely want to do a bond anticipation note only.
okay. And are those typically bonded out for 20, 30 years,
20.
20-ish? So at 5.75% over 20 years. at
4.25.
Oh, 4.25, I'll do 4.25. At 4.25% over 20 years, the level debt service is just under $400,000.
Yeah, about 350,000, but depends upon whether you do it with level principal or level debt service. And remember, you do have some debt coming off of your debt schedule over the next few years.
Yosemite National Park's annual budget is $30 million. So we're spending 1/6 of that on the parks in Lunenburg.
To build Marshall Park.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
And we don't know what's gonna happen with TCP, Ritter, or Town Hall yet.
We tried yesterday. Tony and I tried on Sunday.
What'd you try to do?
Our Cub Scouts had a.
shooting
ahead.
off rockets, and I saw Evan in the crowd. And I walked over. I was like, if that building burns down, this would be great for the town of Lunenburg.
Were you aiming for the Brooks house?
No, but there is a rocket on top of Brick's house today. No, I'm sorry, it's on the top of the senior
Adult,
center.
yeah, the adult activity
Oh,
center.
don't
There's-
burn that down.
Oh, that
No,
No, no,
building's
no,
in
no,
the be-
that one was totally accidental.
that-
There are
that
three
building's in the
there are
best
three in
shape of them
trees.
all.
Yeah,
One
the-
in
the-
right
the
one.
rockets
will
were-
put a rocket on top of the Brooks house.
Slightly aimed towards TCP, but that was only because there was wind.
Yeah, yeah, we tried.
I do.
Yeah, I don't know. This is gonna be, yeah.
If we don't have anything else, I'm gonna go say hi to my children because I've been in another meeting since 3 o'clock.
Evan, can you give me a quick call afterwards, please?
Can do.
Thank you.
Sure.
Do we
Thanks,
need a motion?
Evan.
No problem.
Thank you.
Are we free to go?
Yeah.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.